There are moments when three simple words can turn a secret meeting into a public reckoning. And there are dinners that reveal more about the people you trust than years of friendship ever could. For me, that moment came when I walked into Romano's Italian restaurant and said, "Table for three?" to my husband and my sister, who were sitting at what they thought was their private secret dinner. My name is Rachel, and until that Tuesday evening, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. My husband Mark and I had been married for 6 years, and my sister Claire had always been my closest confidant and best friend. We were the kind of family that neighbors envied, close-knit, supportive, always there for each other through every crisis and celebration. But for the past 3 months, something had felt off. Mark had been working late more often, claiming new projects and demanding clients. Claire had been mysteriously busy whenever I suggested our usual sister dinners, always with vague excuses about work commitments or social obligations I'd never heard her mention before. That Tuesday, I was supposed to be at my book club meeting, discussing the latest bestseller with the same group of women I'd been meeting with for 2 years. But the meeting had been canceled at the last minute due to our host coming down with the flu. Instead of going home to an empty house, Mark had said he'd be working late again, I decided to treat myself to dinner at Romano's, the Italian place where Mark and I had our first date. I never expected to walk in and see my husband and my sister at a corner table, leaning in close, their hands almost touching across the white tablecloth, looking like they were sharing the kind of intimate conversation that should have been between a married couple, not a man and his sister-in-law. The moment I saw them together, everything clicked into place. And that's when I decided to make an entrance they'd never forget. I stood frozen in the doorway of Romano's, my heart pounding as I took in the scene before me. Mark and Claire were seated at table 12, the same corner booth where Mark had nervously asked me to be his girlfriend 6 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd chosen our place for their secret meeting. From where I stood, partially hidden behind a decorative column, I could observe them without being seen. Mark was wearing the navy blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday last month, the one he said made him feel confident. Claire was dressed in a way I'd never seen her dress for a casual dinner, a sleek black dress with her hair styled in loose waves, wearing the diamond earrings our grandmother had left her. They weren't just having a quick family catch-up. This was a date. Mark was leaning across the table, speaking in low, intimate tones. Claire was smiling in a way that made my stomach turn, the soft, flirtatious smile I'd seen her use with boyfriends, but never with family members. When Mark reached across to brush an imaginary crumb from Claire's cheek, she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch. I watched as the waiter brought them a bottle of wine. Not just any one, but the expensive Chianti that Mark always ordered for special occasions. They toasted to something, and I could see Claire mouth the words, "to us," before they clinked glasses. My legs felt weak. This wasn't a recent development. The way they moved around each other, the easy intimacy, the inside jokes that made them both laugh, this had been going on for a while, maybe months, maybe longer. I thought about all the times recently when Claire had asked about Mark's schedule, all the times she'd volunteered to help with things around our house when I was working late, all the times Mark had mentioned running into Claire by coincidence at the grocery store or the gym. There had been no coincidences. This had all been planned. I watched them for another few minutes, gathering my courage and my rage. Mark was playing with Claire's fingers across the table now, and she was giggling like a teenager. They looked happy. They looked like a couple in love. They also looked like two people who had no idea they were about to have the worst night of their lives. I smoothed down my jacket, took a deep breath, and walked toward their table with purpose. The hostess approached me with a bright smile. "Table for one tonight?" "Actually," I said, loudly enough for Mark and Claire to hear, "table for three." The effect was immediate and devastating. Mark's wine glass slipped from his hand, red Chianti spilling across the white tablecloth like blood. Claire's face went from flushed and happy to completely pale in the span of 2 seconds. They both turned toward my voice with identical expressions of horror. "Rachel," Mark stammered, jumping to his feet so quickly that he knocked over his chair. "What are you? I thought you had book club tonight." "Canceled," I said, walking calmly toward their table. "Lucky for me, right? Otherwise, I would have missed this lovely family dinner." Claire was still sitting, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to form words but couldn't quite manage it. The diamond earrings caught the restaurant's dim lighting, and I noticed she was also wearing the perfume I'd given her for Christmas, the expensive one she said she was saving for special occasions. "Rachel, I can explain," Mark started. "Can you?" I pulled out the third chair at their table and sat down without waiting for an invitation. Because from where I was standing, it looked like my husband was on a romantic date with my sister. The couple at the next table had stopped eating and were openly staring now. The waiter who had been approaching with their appetizers hung back, clearly sensing the tension. "This isn't what it looks like," Claire finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Really?" I picked up the wine bottle and examined the label. "Because it looks like you ordered the Chianti Classico, the one Mark always gets for anniversaries and special celebrations. It looks like you're wearing a cocktail dress to have dinner with your brother-in-law. It looks like you two were holding hands." "We weren't holding hands," Mark said weakly. "I was watching you for 10 minutes, Mark. I saw everything." Claire burst into tears. But they weren't the tears of someone who'd been caught doing something she regretted. They were tears of frustration, like a child whose favorite toy had been taken away. "How long?" I asked, my voice eerily calm even to my own ears. Neither of them answered. "How long have you been sleeping together?" "Rachel, please, not here." Mark glanced around at the other diners, who were pretending not to listen. "Here is perfect. Here is where you brought my sister for a romantic dinner. Here is where you thought you could have your little secret affair without me finding out. So here is where you're going to tell me the truth." I folded my hands on the table and looked between them. "I'm waiting." The silence stretched on, broken only by Claire's quiet sobbing and the ambient noise of a restaurant that had suddenly become very interested in our table. Finally, Claire lifted her head and looked at me with red, tear-stained eyes. 8 months, she whispered. 8 months? The words hit me like a physical blow. 8 months meant this had started long before I'd noticed anything wrong. 8 months meant they'd been lying to my face through Christmas, through my birthday, through Claire's birthday when I'd thrown her a surprise party. 8 months, I repeated, my voice still unnaturally calm. "And how exactly did this start?" Mark sat back down heavily, looking defeated. "Rachel, please, can we do this at home?" "No, you chose to have your relationship in public, so we're going to discuss it in public. Claire, I asked you a question." Claire wiped her nose with her napkin, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "It started at Jake's wedding. You remember, you had food poisoning and couldn't go." I remembered. Claire had offered to be Mark's +1 so he wouldn't have to go alone to his college roommate's wedding. I'd been grateful for her thoughtfulness. "You went to Jake's wedding together and decided to start an affair?" "It wasn't like that," Mark said. "We were just talking at the reception and we realized we had a lot in common." "You have a lot in common because she's my sister, Mark. She has the same interests as me because we grew up in the same house." "It's more than that," Claire said, her voice getting stronger. "Mark and we understand each other in a way that what? In a way that Mark and I don't?" Claire nodded, and I saw something in her expression that made me even angrier than the affair itself. She looked defiant. Not sorry, not ashamed, but defiant. "Rachel, you and Mark were having problems," she continued. "He told me how unhappy he was." "What problems? What unhappiness? Mark, what did you tell her?" Mark looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. We were going through a rough patch and Claire was easy to talk to. What rough patch? We had one fight about your mother visiting for Christmas. One fight. It was more than that, Claire said, her voice getting stronger. Mark and we understand each other in a way that what? In a way that Mark and I don't? Claire nodded, and I saw something in her expression that made me even angrier than the affair itself. She looked defiant. Not sorry, not ashamed, but defiant. Rachel, you were having problems, she continued. He told me how unhappy he was. What problems? What unhappiness? Mark, what did you tell her? Mark looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. We were going through a rough patch and Claire was easy to talk to. What rough patch? We had one fight about your mother visiting for Christmas. One fight. It was more than that, Claire said. Mark told me he felt like you two were just going through the motions, like roommates instead of lovers. He told you we were like roommates? I turned to Mark. Is that how you described our marriage to my sister before you started sleeping with her? Mark couldn't meet my eyes. Rachel, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You both convinced yourselves that I was the problem so you could feel better about betraying me. That's not fair, Claire said, her voice gaining an edge. You don't know what it was like for Mark. He was lonely, Rachel. You were always working late, always tired, always what? Claire, always providing for our household, always trying to build a career so Mark and I could have a future together? I turned to Mark. Is that what you told her? That I was a terrible wife because I worked hard? I never said you were terrible, but you said I was distant. You said we were like roommates. You painted me as this cold, unavailable woman to justify sleeping with my sister. Rachel, you were distant. Even I could see it. You barely had time for me anymore, let alone for Mark. I was distant because I was working on the Morrison account. I was trying to make partner at the firm. Mark knew this was a temporary situation. We discussed it. And Claire, I barely had time for you because every time I suggested getting together, you were suddenly busy. Now I know why. You were busy with my husband. It's not like we planned this, Mark said weakly. Didn't you? 8 months, Mark. 8 months of secret meetings, of lying to me about where you were going, of coming home and kissing me hello after you'd been with her. That's not a mistake. That's a relationship. Claire leaned forward and I saw something in her eyes that shocked me. Jealousy. Rachel, you don't appreciate what you have. You take Mark for granted. You always have. I take him for granted? Yes. You never see how hard he tries to make you happy. You never notice when he does something special for you. You're always focused on work, on your next goal, on everything except your husband. And you noticed all of this? How? By watching my marriage? By studying my husband? By being there for him when you weren't? The truth hit me like a lightning bolt. You wanted my life, didn't you, Claire? You've always wanted my life. Claire's face crumpled, but not with shame, with anger. Why shouldn't I want it? You have everything, the successful career, the beautiful house, the perfect husband, and you act like none of it matters. Because it's my life, Claire, my marriage, my husband, my choices. Well, maybe Mark deserves someone who actually wants to be with him. Like you? Yes, like me. I love him. I really love him. Not the way you love him, like an obligation, but really love him. The words hung in the air between us, and I realized that my sister hadn't just betrayed me, she had convinced herself that she was saving Mark from me. I sat back in my chair and looked at both of them, Mark, who couldn't meet my eyes, and Claire, who was staring at me with a mixture of defiance and desperation. Well, I said finally, this is certainly illuminating. I picked up the wine bottle and poured myself a glass of their expensive Chianti. So let me make sure I understand this correctly. Claire, you've been in love with my husband for 8 months, convinced that you could love him better than I do. And Mark, you've been so unhappy in our marriage that you decided the solution was to sleep with my sister instead of, Oh, I don't know. Talking to me about it. Rachel, Mark started. I'm not finished. I took a sip of the wine. You know what's funny? You're both acting like this is some great love story, like you're star-crossed lovers who found each other despite the odds. Claire wiped her eyes. You don't understand what we have. What you have is an affair built on lies and betrayal. What you have is a relationship that required you to deceive someone who loved and trusted both of you. I looked directly at Claire. And what you have, sister dear, is my husband, the one you stole, the one you had to share with me for 8 months because he was too much of a coward to leave me. He was trying not to hurt you. By lying to me every day for 8 months, by making me feel crazy for thinking something was wrong, by letting me plan our anniversary dinner while he was planning dates with you. Mark finally looked up. Rachel, what do you want from us? An apology? We're sorry, we never meant for this to happen. What I want, I said, standing up, is for you both to understand that you've lost me. Forever. I pulled off my wedding ring and placed it on the table next to the wine stain. Mark, I'll have divorce papers drawn up this week. You can move in with Claire. I'm sure she'll be thrilled to finally have the life she's always wanted. Rachel, please don't do this. Claire reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I'm not doing this, Claire. You did this. 8 months ago when you decided my husband was more important than your sister. I picked up my purse and looked at them one final time. Enjoy your dinner. Enjoy your relationship. And enjoy explaining to our parents why their daughters will never speak to each other again. Rachel, wait, Mark called after me. But I was already walking away. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. 6 months later, I'm writing this for my new apartment downtown. A beautiful loft with floor-to-ceiling windows that I chose entirely for myself, without considering anyone else's opinion. The divorce was finalized last month, and I got the partnership at my firm that I'd been working toward when Mark decided I was being distant. The aftermath wasn't pretty. Our parents were devastated when they learned the truth. Mom cried for days, not just about the divorce, but about losing the close relationship she'd always had with both her daughters. Dad was furious with Claire in a way I'd never seen before. The kind of disappointed anger that comes from watching someone you raised make choices that go against everything you taught them about loyalty and family. Mark and Claire moved in together 2 weeks after our restaurant confrontation. I heard through mutual friends that they seemed happy at first, but that the reality of their relationship, built as it was on secrecy and betrayal, didn't translate well to everyday life. When you start a relationship by proving you're both capable of elaborate deception, it turns out it's hard to trust each other. They broke up 4 months later. Mark tried to contact me afterwards, sending long emails about how he'd made a terrible mistake, how he'd been confused and manipulated, how he wanted to try again. I deleted them all without reading past the first few lines. Claire sent me a letter last month. An actual handwritten letter like we were living in the 1800s. She apologized and said she understood if I never wanted to see her again, but that she missed her sister and hoped someday we could find a way back to each other. I haven't responded. I'm not sure I ever will. But here's what I learned from that dinner at Romano's. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who are willing to hurt you the deepest. Sometimes the family members who say they want what's best for you are really just saying they want what's best for themselves. And sometimes walking into a secret dinner and saying, "Table for 3," is exactly the kind of confrontation that sets you free. The truth might be devastating, but it's also liberating. Now I know exactly who I can trust, and more importantly, I know that I can trust myself to handle whatever comes next. Did you like this content? Then subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos, leave a like, and share with anyone who needs to reflect on these family challenges. Together, we can transform our relationships.